second day of the third virtual and 17th annual Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I am on the steering committee. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Grace D. Lee, who grew up in Pearland, Texas, and is a graduate of Duke University, where she studied biology and creative writing. She lives in Northern California and attends medical school at Stanford University. Portrait of a Thief is her debut novel and is currently in development at Netflix, with Grace serving as an executive producer for the series, which is amazing. Brendan Nicholas Slocumb was born in Yuba City, California, and was raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He was the concertmaster for the University Symphony Orchestra at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and served as the principal violist. He has performed with numerous small chamber ensembles and the Besque String Quartet. For the past 23 years, he has been a public and private school music educator, is a Nobel Educator of Distinction. He also serves as an educational consultant for the Kennedy Center and as a concertmaster for the Nova Annandale Symphony Orchestra. He lives in Washington, D.C., and The Violin Conspiracy is his first novel. These are the novels, A Portrait of a Thief and Violin Conspiracy. And for starters, I'd just love for you each to give an introduction to your books. Brendan, I have heard that 92% of your book is based on your lived experience. I'm sure that's about how you have the Stradivarius. So please tell us about your $10 million violin.
First, thank you so much for having me here today, Leslie. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I want to say to Grace, congratulations on your Netflix deal. That's fantastic. Awesome. Congrats. 92% of my protagonist, Ray McMillan, is Brendan. I wanted to live vicariously through Ray. The only things that Ray has accomplished that I have not, he got to compete in the Tchaikovsky competition, whereas had I started violin maybe a few years sooner, I would be at his level. So I'll just do it through him. I don't have a Stradivarius, but I do have a pretty nice violin. Strads are usually 16th, 17th century. I have an 18th century violin. It's a French-made instrument, and I absolutely love it. And if Ray were to ever play it, I'm sure he'd say the same thing.
And Grace, what about you? I think your book is based partially on real life experiences as well.
Yes, partially. So I love the description that you used, Brendan, about saying that it's 92% you. And so I'll borrow that and say that my characters, there are 5 main characters in the book. They're all Chinese American, and they are college students stealing back looted Chinese art from Western museums. And so I would say partially me, my friends, my college experiences, except I have never taken part in a heist. And based on all the stress dreams that I had while writing this book, I don't think I could do it.
Too much pressure, huh?
It's too much pressure. I've had several dreams where I'm walking around. I'm a tour guide at Stanford's Art Museum. And so in my dream, I'm walking around there and I'm scoping out the cameras, and I know that I have to steal something to study for my book. And I get too nervous. My hands get shaky. And I think, no, I'm going to get kicked out of school.
That is so interesting. So both of you are debut novelists, and you've both seen a lot of success. Let's start with you, Grace. Obviously, your book is in development at Netflix. That's amazing. How has the process of publication been different than what you expected? I can't imagine you expected all of this. So has it been a surprise, and how has it been for you?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so excited to talk about this and to hear your story too, Brendan, because people keep congratulating me on my first book. And I keep having to say, this is not the first book I've ever written. This is just the first book that anyone else is ever reading. And so I wrote several novels before this, and one will never see the light of day. The other is the one that got me my literary agent. And then we spent 2 years revising, 2 unsuccessful years on submission to publishing houses. And then this one was the third one. And so I expected the process to go a lot more slowly. I think I finished writing it and my agent and I revised pretty quickly, and we went out to publishing houses. And I was expecting to sit around for years because I'd done it before. And instead, things happened very quickly. And then shortly afterwards, we went out to Hollywood. And then I had a fun time meeting with a bunch of producers via Zoom and experiencing all of the Hollywood aspect of it. So I think the really surprising thing has just been getting this enthusiasm. And now that my book has been out for a month, hearing from readers. And I think that's really the part that's most exciting for me.
Right, before I get to you, Brendan, just as a follow-up, Grace, how involved are you in the Netflix initiative? It says, what you're an executive producer, so are you involved a lot or in the medium, or how's it going?
Yeah, so this is my very first experience in Hollywood. Brendan and I were both in LA very recently for the LA Times Festival of Books. And so while I was there, I got to have a meeting with my Netflix team, which was very exciting. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to share, but they're working on the pilot. We are still in the very early stages. And so my attitude is I'll be as involved as they let me, but also, I know publishing a little, but I don't know very much about TV.
Right. And how about you, Brendan? I mean, your book has now brought you to Carnegie Hall, which I don't know if any writer would ever suspect that would be the result of their novel, but how's the experience been for you?
I'm going to echo Grace 100%. Everything. It's the exact same thing. And much like Grace, this is not my first novel, but it is the first one that anyone will actually see. And if anyone has my first book, please burn it immediately. Please. I don't want anyone to see that. Yeah, it's things have moved a lot quicker than I expected they would. Once I finished writing the book, I expected to sit around and wait for a year or so. And things happened within a week, and it was just amazing. The first publisher passed, and of course that's discouraging, but I was totally accustomed to the disappointments of having your book rejected. Oh, okay, that's fine. And then the second one, I set up a meeting, or a meeting was set up, and I attended, and I just couldn't believe the nice things that they had to say about this book. And I'm like, wow, you really like this. My goal was to have one person like this story. That's all I wanted, one person. And I am going to drop a little bit of good news. Grace, I hate to steal your thunder. I'm so sorry, but Violin Conspiracy has been optioned by Sony, and it's going to come to the small screen, a limited series. They are working on it right now. So I echo your excitement, Grace. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Amazing.
Oh my God.
Congratulations. I don't think that's a stealing of thunder. I think that's a sharing of thunder.
We're going to share the thunder. There's enough thunder for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations. That's great news. So I also want to ask, both of you have different careers. Brendan, you're a professional musician. Grace, you're in med school. So, underachievers here. What drew you to also want to be novelists? Brendan, why don't we start with you on this one?
I always enjoyed writing. I never even considered doing it as a profession, but I'd always enjoyed writing. And the summer of 2020, as a working musician, everything stopped. I mean, everything, my lessons, my recitals, my concerts, my rehearsals, nothing. And then about a month into it, you lose the motivation to practice because there's nothing to practice for, and everything is in limbo. You just don't know when it's going to pick up again. And that was my career. That's how I paid my rent and bought food and clothes and everything. So it was very scary. So I turned to writing because I had a lot of time. And considering that first book that I wrote, it wasn't that bad in my head. So I figured I should try it again. And the agent that I have, who is phenomenal, he suggested after reading my first book, he's like, yeah, this is really, really terrible, but you have a great voice, so you should try writing what you know. I was like, well, I'm a musician. He said, you really should try writing about music because you've got an interesting voice. And I wrote a chapter of the Violin Conspiracy, and he was like, wow, this is really good. So I consider myself a musician who writes. I'll say that.
Nice. Just a side question. Are you back to performing now, or it's sort of?
It's
Slowly?
like it's a catch-22. It's terrible. Things have gotten better with COVID, but because of all the success with this book, I've been traveling so much I can't perform as much as I'd like to. So I
Great.
did manage to squeak in one rehearsal last week and 4 lessons this week. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we'll file that under a good problem to have.
Awesome.
Grace, how about you? You're balancing your writing life and medical school, which I hear is pretty intense.
Yeah, so I think my story is, along similar lines as Brendan. Brendan, huge congrats on Sony. Oh my gosh, I know we were just celebrating it, but I was so glad when Leslie directed the question to you first, because I was just sitting here celebrating to myself. I'm still reading The Violin Conspiracy, but while I was reading it, I was just thinking that I would love to see it all visualized, and so I'm so glad that's going to happen.
And I got to get you to sign my copy of your book. I don't know why it didn't. I didn't know. Never mind. Okay, yeah, we were in the same place. Yes, absolutely.
Next time we're in the same place.
Absolutely.
I was in North Carolina recently, also for an event, and I saw your signed book next to mine when I was in a Barnes and Noble. I was signing books, and I saw your book next to mine.
Okay, so I'm going to North Carolina, and I'm picking that one up. That's the one I'm getting.
Sounds good. Yeah. So for me, very similar. So I'd really been writing for all my life, but I never really entertained it as a serious career option. And growing up, there weren't very many books by Asian Americans, and so I also kind of thought that it wasn't really something that people like me did. And then I think that really only started to change, as I started reading more Asian American authors. The industry started changing. But also during COVID, I was back at home, nothing to do. Med school was online. So they taught me how to put in an IV virtually. So, that's a concern all of its own. But I felt very lost at that time. And I also felt very helpless because a lot of the reasons why I wanted to go into medicine, it was all taking place in the world right now, but I was, I'm still in school, I'm still in training. And so I couldn't really do anything. And at the same time, there's all this, turmoil going on in the United States, even outside of COVID. And I think that I had been playing around with the idea of Portrait of a Thief for a while. But while I was at home, I really thought about how I wanted to read something a little joyful, a little escapist, with characters who look like me, able to travel the world and to steal back this looted art. And so I really wrote this book, I think, first for myself because I wanted to read it. And I think everything else that's come after with other people reading it has just really been a bonus.
Amazing. One thing I realized that we didn't quite do was go through a quick synopsis of the plot of each book. So Grace, could you just give us the sort of quick synopsis, please?
Yes, so Portrait of a Thief is an Asian American heist novel. So it is inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from museums around the world. But in my fictionalized version, it's 5 Chinese American college students committing these thefts and stealing back this looted art for China.
Yeah, it's amazing heist novel and has a lot of great topics, but it's also so fun to read. And Brendan, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about the plot of The Violin Conspiracy?
Absolutely. Violin Conspiracy is a story of Ray, who discovers that his old family fiddle is actually a priceless Stradivarius violin. And this discovery catapults him into superstardom in the world of classical music. And right before the Tchaikovsky competition, which is basically the Olympics of classical music, his instrument is stolen. Will he get to compete? Will he find out who took it? Will he get it back? Could it have been his family who wants him to sell the instrument so they can split the money? Was it, the slave owners' descendants who used to own his great-great-grandfather who say that he stole the instrument from them and they want it back? It could be anybody.
Right. So because this book is based so much on your life, it could have really gone to a lot of different genres. It could have been a love story. It could have been a different kind of book. Why did you go for the mystery genre?
I have always been a huge mystery guy. Agatha Christie is one of my favorite writers. I read Death on the Nile when I was 13 years old, cover to cover, and I was angry because I could not figure out who did it. And I love the way that she chooses who did it, whoever is going to be the thief. Or the criminal. I love how she does it. She goes and writes the entire story and then goes back and says, okay, it's going to be this person. So I decided to use that same technique, and just always loving mysteries. That was one of the things that I was excited to be able to do. And this book actually started off as a YA novel, and the first chapter was Ray in high school. And so my agent and I just kind of talked about it a little bit. Yeah, we don't want to go too YA, so we're going to have to cut this chapter, which I love. It's a great chapter sitting in my scraps pile right now. And, so we decided to make it a little more of an adult mystery. And I'm glad that we went that route.
Gotcha. What about you, Grace? What attracted you to the heist novel?
Yeah, so I have always loved heist movies. And so, I watched all the Ocean's movies. My siblings and I would watch the Fast and Furious movies together. We'd get into debates about who would play who in a heist. And so when I first learned about these real life heists and the Chinese art that was getting stolen from museums around the world, I was immediately captivated. And I think that I really wanted to imagine a heist that was done not by expert criminals, but Chinese American college students, and how they would pull something like that off. And I just had so much fun mapping, college majors onto heist archetypes. And so we have a con artist who's a public policy major, and that sort of matching over there. And interestingly enough, originally I was also torn about whether my book should be YA or adult, because the characters, they are juniors, seniors in college. And originally I thought maybe they would be freshmen, sophomores. I think the college time is a very tricky age where they can either fall into YA or adult. And I had a conversation with my agent that was really seems very similar to your conversation, Brendan, where ultimately we decided it made more sense for them to be a little older and to have all the struggles that come with the cusp of graduation and change, and also just being in their early 20s. And so we landed solidly adult.
Interesting. My next and last event I'll be moderating is with two debut YA authors.
Yeah, so that could have been us. Could have gone the other direction.
Absolutely.
In a different world. I wanted to ask you all how your stories evolved over time. How did you think of them originally, and how did they change over the course of the actual writing?
Grace.
Oh, okay. And then you get some time to think.
A little bit, yeah.
So mine, before writing this book, I wasn't really a plotter. And so I would write the story and let things happen as they may. And I think for a heist novel, I had to really sit down and plan everything out, because when I started writing the book, I thought to myself, I'm not smart enough to write this book, but it doesn't exist and I really want to read it. So I've really got to write it. And I was stuck on the first 5 or so chapters for about a year and a half, because I just couldn't figure out where the story would start and how the characters would all get together. And then finally, I think I watched Ocean's 11. I rewatched Ocean's 11, and there's a scene in the book where the characters are watching Ocean's 11 and taking notes, and that was directly lifted from my own research experience, where I was watching and I was taking notes, and I thought, I like how the story begins over there, and so I'm going to see if I can make something similar. So a lot of the later bits were already planned out, but the beginning I really worked on for a while.
Interesting.
I too am a plotter. Boom, boom, boom. Part one, part two, part three, and it all evolved over time. And as I was writing, I realized that I did not know a lot of stuff. It's just like, great, I didn't know. I interviewed FBI agents. I interviewed insurance people. I interviewed, private investigators. Everything. And as I got the knowledge of what these people actually do, it's not everything that you see on TV is not, everything is not a CSI, or it really isn't. People say that, but wow, there's so much involved. And as I gained the knowledge of exactly what these people do to recover stolen items, it changed the course of the book tremendously. It's like, oh, I can just do this and this. And then when I actually did the interviews, oh, wait a minute, that's not going to happen because it's so unrealistic. I've got to go back and give it a sense of reality, bring it back to this world, not the television world. So it did morph into a lot of different things that stemmed from getting the info from the professionals who actually do this stuff. So there were a lot of changes that took place.
Did you all have readers as well? Early readers or sensitivity readers that gave you notes that had a big impact on the book?
So I can go first on this one, Grace. Yes, absolutely. Because as a musician, a lot of the terminology that I used, it's perfect sense to me. A lot of the Italian musical terms, they make, it's like me just speaking English. So I let a few people read a couple of sections and they were like, Brendan, I have no idea what this means. None, no clue. Okay, so I need to go back and do a little bit of, I need to come up with some imagery and some metaphors here. And that really helped with the descriptions of the music. And, I was asked, what do you think about when you play this? Oh, okay, well, it just comes naturally to me. I never really thought about what I think about. So that was an interesting process. I literally had to go deeper into what it is that I do to get people to understand what it's going on in the mind of a musician when I play. So my beta readers really helped out with that aspect.
Amazing. Grace?
Yeah, similar. I had a lot of early readers. And so usually my sister is the first one to read anything that I write. And so I finish it and then I give it to her and I say, just read through it and tell me if it makes sense. And just because I want to get a general sense of, what needs work, but also if the bones of the story are there. And then I have been very fortunate in that I have many other writer friends who are a little further along in the process because we all started writing at the same time, but their careers took off much quicker. And so I have a lot of friends who have published trilogies out in the time that it took me to start and finish this one book and all the other books before.
While
so
you were also in medical school.
And so I think it was a lot of fun sending it to them and having certain people who I knew were particularly good at plot or particularly good at character, or sending it out to everyone and saying, okay, the big thing in this heist story is the twist at the end. So let me know if that bit works, if everything makes sense, if you can see how it comes together. So that was always on my mind at the beginning.
And do people have good reactions or mixed or okay, awesome. I don't want to say too much about the plots of these books because there's spoilers all throughout. In fact, before you came on, Brendan and Grace and I were chatting, I think I gave her a spoiler accidentally.
I've forgotten.
She forgot. So thank you for those. I also, Grace, I saw you did I think it was an introduction to your book where you mentioned that part of the book questions who art is for. And I think that's relevant to both these books. Is classical music just for white kids? Who owns the art we see in museums? A lot of that art has been lifted from other cultures, not just Chinese culture. So I was hoping both of you could talk about that and how it played in your books.
That is a central theme for my book, The Violin Conspiracy. Music it really is for everyone. It doesn't matter what your zip code is or how much is in your bank account. And that message it might seem like it's kind of a simple, okay, sure, everybody knows that, but it's not like that in the classical music world. I will listen to classical music and people look at me like, what are you doing? Why are you listening to that? Or I go into a place with my violin and people really don't think that I'm capable of playing, the music that I've been hired to play. And I'm hoping that with this book, that message really does come through, that it is for everyone and everyone can get something out of it. And it's not just for a specific group of people. And hopefully after reading The Violin Conspiracy, people will receive that message and just have their minds expanded. And that is a fantastic question. I'm so happy you asked that, Leslie.
Thank you. And Grace?
Yeah, I love this question, and I think it's just so fitting for this conversation because I think both our books touch on this theme of who gets to love art and who is art made for. Because growing up, I always loved going to art museums, but I would always feel just a little bit uneasy there, just because I would sometimes think that I didn't get what was going on, or I felt like those places were not really accessible for people who didn't grow up going to art museums or grew up getting that education in art and art history. And so part of why I wrote the book and why I love being a tour guide at Stanford's Art Museum is just this conversation about who gets to experience art. And especially, I think this is an ongoing conversation among museum goers and museum curators right now, is that there is a lot of art in museums that has been taken from other cultures. And there are a lot of debates surrounding whether it should go back, whether it should not. I take issue with many of the arguments that claim that Western museums or European museums or American museums can better display the art or display it to a wider audience or civilized society, when really, to me, and this is an essential theme in the book, it's that art belongs to the creator, and then it gets to be shared most widely. And it's really, art is a form of power, and we always need to be aware of that.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, amazing. I feel I love to go to museums, and I did grow up going to museums, but I always feel an unease knowing that half the stuff here or more has been looted from other countries. And it's amazing to see it all in one place at the Met, which is, a 20-minute walk from my house, my apartment. But then there's a lot of guilt also. Sort of like, oh, all this stuff is stolen from other cultures. Well, I don't know what to do about that. I still like to visit the Met.
Okay, we're going to bring it back up now. Let's bring it up. Let's bring it up.
I think there's also, a lot of conversation about the identity of Chinese Americans and Black Americans in each of your books individually. And I was hoping you could also talk a little bit about how you found those voices and added them to the story.
It was kind of easy to do being a Black American. People say, wow, this is, I tell people that this is my perspective. Things like this happened really, like a lot of the experiences in the book are my own experiences. And I've often been, when I would tell people about these things, I get the same comments every time. You're just exaggerating. Oh, no, it wasn't that bad. No, you're just, no. You're just getting a little bit too ahead of yourself. Things like that really don't happen. And it always ends up being a conversation about my perspective versus their perspective. And they generally tell me that my perspective is wrong because it's different from theirs. And I just have to get people to understand, a perspective is just that. It's my experience, and it's not right or wrong. It's just mine. And, things like this do happen. Things like this happen every day. Just because you're not exposed to them does not mean that it doesn't take place. And, my experience is no less valid than yours because it is different. And a lot of people have said, and I'm really, really happy that the book has actually opened people's minds a bit. I was in Dallas doing a talk, and this gentleman in the audience stood up and said, I didn't believe a word of what was going on in this book that I was reading until I read your author's notes, and seeing you here today, it really changed my mind, and it really made me think. It's like, wow, things like this do happen. Maybe I should look at things from a different lens. Not everything is going to be seen and experienced the same way, and I need to be more wary of that. And that made me smile from here to there. Just the fact that, it opened his mind a little bit. So, goal achieved.
Right. That's a great result. Grace, what about you?
Yeah, I love hearing that story. And I'm so glad that it's been able to reach readers and to change people's perspectives. I think I also I I often think about this book as an identity story disguised as a heist story, because it is largely about the characters, and of course they are pulling off these heists and traveling across Europe and going to these museums, but they're also trying to navigate what it means to be Asian American. The book takes place after a pandemic, and so it's just what life is like, what change and growth and being in your 20s and navigating the world. I think that a lot of the reasons why I wrote this book wasn't so much to teach other people something. I'm glad when I hear that people get something out of it, but it was really, I think, for the person that I was when I was younger. And so the moments that have really been meaningful for me is seeing it reach other readers and Asian American readers, and knowing that they saw a bit of themselves in it, because the book was a bit self-indulgent for me, and that I put all of the fun moments that I loved. And so the characters go out to karaoke before a heist, they're drinking boba while planning out how they're going to break into a museum. And so all these details where I put myself in the book, and so it means a lot when I see readers who enjoy it, but also readers who really connect to it.
It's amazing. Yeah. I hope that a lot of people are really connecting to both of them. Obviously, I mean, you're both going to be on TV, and so it seems like there's definitely a lot of connection for both of them. I want to switch directions a little bit and ask you both if there were any books that you looked to as sort of roadmaps when you were writing these books. And before you answer, I also want to remind the audience that if you want to ask some questions, we'll have time to do that to answer them before we end. So please drop those questions in the Q&A. Brendan, I think you were going to say something.
I'm a huge mystery guy. Agatha Christie. I just, Agatha Christie and sort of Arthur Conan Doyle. I still think about The Hound or the Baskervilles. Mysteries have always just fascinated me. It's just, why do people do things? How do they do things? How do you figure out what's going on in someone else's head? That has always been amazing to me. So I really went back to, I like to say my roots, not really my roots, but Agatha Christie's roots. And I've just always been a huge mystery guy. So she has been the one who's, basically steered me in the direction of the writing of the Violin Conspiracy.
I'm a big fan of Agatha too, and I've obsessively listened to her audiobooks over the pandemic. I think she has a really light touch, and that's pretty amazing. Grace, how about you?
Yeah, I split kind of my reading into 3 different buckets. And so the first one were books that I read for the plot and the pacing. And so I read a lot of thrillers for that, and as many heist novels, and also heist shows and movies that I could get my hands on. And then the next bucket was art nonfiction. And because I wanted to know about real life museum heists, because of course this is inspired by real museum break-ins. So I wanted to make sure that I was getting the facts right over there, but also that I had a solid foundation when it came to talking about the history of museums and how they keep and display loose art and all the complicated ethical questions behind that. And then the last category of books that I read was a lot of Asian American fiction, because I wanted to, build on that and to talk about these issues of identity. And there are so many authors that I love, like Wei-Ko Wong and Jean Kwok, that do such a good job of that. And so I wanted to be able to bring it all together into this art heist novel.
Well done. Well done. I wanted to talk also a little bit about your processes for writing, especially since you both do have, other careers and pulls on your time and energy. Do you write in the morning? What's your sort of writing schedule, if you will? Grace, why don't you start?
So for me, I am a bit of a perfectionist when it comes with writing. And so the big struggle for me is that in order to continue writing, I write completely linearly and I need to reread everything I've already written in order to keep going, which is
Every time?
yeah. So it's not a problem when I'm early on, and I only have to read a couple chapters, but it does pose a bit of an issue when I'm at the end of a book and I've got to reread, like a couple hundred pages to get there. And so my only workaround is that I try to write often at night or in the evening, because then I'm a little tired, my standards are a little lower, and I can get away with just writing without agonizing over every single choice of word. And then I usually revise in the morning when my eyes are a little sharper.
And that counts as your reading time as well, I hope. So by the end of the day, you read the whole thing again.
Yeah, so I've read my book many times.
That is really, you can imagine, I've heard a lot of people tell me about their processes, and it's always fascinating, but that is one of the more interesting processes.
Oh, no.
When you read the whole thing again before, I mean, that is taking up a lot of time. You are a dedicated perfectionist.
I'm working on it.
Brendan, do you read yours backwards before you start to write every day?
I am not nearly as much of a perfectionist as Grace when it comes to, I will only reread 2 prior chapters to the one that I've written. I only go back a couple of chapters, and I normally exercise in the morning. I go and teach lessons in the morning. I do any practicing that I'm going to do in the morning, and all of my writing is done pretty much between the hours of 1 and 5. As a musician, I'm accustomed to sitting down and practicing for a couple of hours at a time, so it's no big deal for me just to sit and write. I will be on my couch with the computer on my chest, and then my feet are up over here and I'm halfway over here, and then at the end of the day I always end up sitting here in my office to do the last little bit. But only 2 chapters. I can't do it, Grace. I can't do it. I've also read my book several times. Yeah,
I'm gonna learn from you. I'm gonna try and just do a couple chapters.
just a couple.
At least when I'm close to the end.
Yeah.
Well, at the beginning, there are only a couple chapters anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Just keep it going that way. Yeah.
Right. So of course, I want to ask you what you all are working on now. What's the next step for you all, other than your Sony and Netflix deals? Or do you have another novel in the works, Brendan?
Yes, I actually just finished I turned in the manuscript and revisions to my second book called The Composer's Last Score, and it's going to be out in February. And I'm actually about to start writing my 3rd book in June. I'm going to take a short break, and a much needed break, and I'm going to start writing in June, and it's going to be my thing. I think I'm going to make my thing. I'm going to be the next Stephen King. You know what you're going to get from Stephen King. You know exactly what you're going to get. I'm not going to deviate from it. It's going to have a musical tinge and a bit of mystery, and I'm really excited about it. It's it's based on, I'll just say that the protagonist is a cellist. I will say that.
Amazing. What about you, Grace?
So that's all so exciting. I'm excited to get more of your books. I am working on something new. I'm still very early on, so I'm still in the first few chapters where I'm in the stage where I write it and then next day I delete it all and I rewrite it. So that's where I am right now. But it is it's set at Stanford Med, and so based on a lot of my own experiences, and it's about rival graduate students, medical students. There's going to be some cameos from familiar characters. I'm very excited about it.
And is there a heist?
There is not a heist, but there is an FBI investigation, and there will be rivals who end up on opposite sides of the FBI investigation.
Okay, good.
I need that book in my life right now, Grace. Right now.
It sounds amazing. I mean, both of, all of these projects sound amazing. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to also ask you all, what advice you would give yourselves as younger writers now that you've garnered all this critical acclaim? What would you tell yourself as a younger writer in the aftermath of your debut novels?
I think the big thing is just to write the story that I want to read, because I think something that I've really learned in writing and writing towards publication over the past several years is that everything else is really outside of my control. And so the claim, you know, the excitement, it's all been really nice, but it's not things that I had any control over. Those are just things that happened to me. And the only thing that I really could choose is, you know, writing the best book that I could, but also living in the moment and enjoying things and not, you know, getting too hung up on everything that's happening outside of my control, but just enjoying that, you know, I read a book and now it's out in the world.
Yeah, amazing. You wrote a book. Congratulations.
That is fantastic. I mean, that's perfect. And I would add to that for myself. Just don't be afraid don't be offended by any critiques or criticism that has been thrown my way. I look at it like, or I would tell my younger self, just look at it in terms of something that will help you. You know, when you're writing, or when I'm writing in my head, everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. The sentence structure is perfect. Every word that I use is perfect. And then when someone has, you know, a critique and they offer a suggestion, you know, I don't take it personally. It's just to help make you better, and take it that way. So that you can learn from it, as opposed to, you know, fighting everything and everyone. You know, looking back, I wish I had done that. And, you know, maybe the first book I wrote would actually have seen the light of day if I had taken that advice from a lot of people. But now I get it. And every bit of advice or critique that I get from anyone, good or bad, I take it all in. I take what I can use and leave the other stuff.
Right. Just as a quick aside, did you perform the musical interludes on the audiobook, or were those different, a different artist?
If there was, everything happened so fast that they actually asked me to get a group together to be able to play those interludes, and we just didn't have the time when they wanted to do the audiobook, and I was looking forward to it. So I did not play any of the stuff on the book, but I can say for book 3, I can say that there's probably going to be some of Brendan playing in that audio realm. But you know, I can't, my agent will kill me if I said anything about this 3rd book, so I'm not going to say anything.
Amazing. Well, we'll look forward to that. It's very exciting news. I listened to the audiobook and really loved it. So I recommend both of these books to everyone who's come: A Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee and The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocumb. Thank you both so much for being here. We hope to be back in person next year, but it's been so amazing to be able to bring authors from places like California and Washington to Newburyport. And we thank you again, Brendan and Grace. Good luck with your next endeavors, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Grace. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. Thank you for having us.